Dear all, welcome to the International Archives Week talk of Suna Kıraç Library. And today our talk is entitled Globalizing Collections Through Web Portals. Our guest speakers are Tom Miles from the British Library and Jacob Hill from Stanford University. Before introducing our distinguished speakers, I would like to briefly mention to you about International Archives Week. What is it? Why we do it, and the reason of our meeting. So as Koç University Suna Kıraç Library, we are celebrating this week since 2016. International Archives Week is a celebration of the International Council of Archives, also known as ICA. ICA was established on June 9th, 1948, under the guidance of UNESCO. And in 2007, they had decided to celebrate June 9th as the International Archives Day to promote the importance of archives and of our profession. And since 2019, it is expanded to an event of 1 week long. So therefore, since then, we call it the International Archives Week. And every year we are, at Suna Kıraç Library, we are trying to do different events on this week. So this year, our event is focusing on globalizing collections through web portals. For archivists today, the goal is to preserve the archive collections, but also to make them accessible for researchers. The aim is to go beyond the limits of our institutions and make them available to a greater public via different networks of aggregators. So therefore, as a result of it, we decided to organize an event on this subject particularly. We invited two distinguished speakers working actively on those networks and platforms. I would like to thank both our speakers, Jacob Hill and Tom Miles, for accepting our invitation and joining us from the UK and from the US. So we will start the event with Tom Miles' presentation. Tom is based at the British Library's Sound and Vision Department in London. Over the past decade, he has been involved in Europeana projects and especially working on Europeana sounds. His presentation is entitled An Introduction to Europeana Aggregators Forum. So before giving Tom the floor, I would like to remind our audience that after each presentation, there will be a Q&A session, and you may write your questions in the chat section. So dear Tom, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daphne. And I will share my screen. I hope everybody can see that.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. And I'm very, very pleased and honored to be invited to speak. Europeana Sounds has Koç University as a data provider and working with them now to improve the look of the data set on Europeana. It's a very nice collection of environmental sounds from Istanbul. We were very happy to have it added as an associate partner. And it seems such a long time ago now. It was back in 2016 or 17 that we were working on it. Anyway, so I'm going to be giving an introduction to the Europeana Aggregators Forum and explaining, because we're talking about globalizing collections through web portals, I'm going to give people an idea of the different aggregation activities that is going on around Europe. But first of all, I'm just going to say a little bit more about who am I and what do I do? So I am, as Stephanie said, I'm metadata coordinator for Europeana Sounds. We aggregated audio and audio-related content from institutions across Europe, and most of these data providers worked on the Europeana Sounds project from 2014 to 17. At the moment, the British Library also supplies other content to Europeana via Europeana Sounds. And I should say that Europeana Sounds is what is known as a dark aggregator. It doesn't have its own portal. It's just aggregating the audio content onto Europeana. It's quite different from other aggregators. There's a variety. Recently I was elected to the Europeana Aggregators Forum steering group, and I'm deputy chair there. And I'm just going to give you an example of the spread of aggregators where they're based. All these different colored blobs that you can see. Obviously, it's an old map, so the map isn't up to date, but there are about 43 aggregators. You can see that the blue marks are national aggregators. So they're aggregating within their own country, often in their own language, or it may be in a mixture of languages. Then there are the domain aggregators, such as Europeana Sounds. They're working across different mediums such as photographs, archaeology, archives, and sounds and fashion. So they operate in a different way. They're looking there. There's an expertise about a particular medium, such as film and video, that they have, whereas national aggregators will be focusing more on a regional element. And you can see the red marks. They're both national and national aggregator and national library. This is us. This is the steering group. On the steering group with me is the chair, Kirsten Arnold. She's works on the Archive Portal Europe. And Corinne works on MuseU, which is the domain aggregator for museum objects based in France. And then our two representatives from Europeana, Henning is the data ingestion manager, and Susanna is the liaison between us and Europeana Foundation and the Europeana Network Association. And I'm going to talk about the elephant not in the room here, because we're dealing with what's aggregated on Europeana is usually a small fraction of what maybe an aggregator is aggregating. And that may not be the whole story in terms of the data providers that provide to that aggregator. And to give you an example, the UK has, I think, about 56 institutions that provide data sets onto Europeana. And there are way more than 56 institutions in the UK that could provide that data. So this elephant not in the room looks a little bit more like this. So right in the middle, you can see there are the collections on Europeana, and they're provided via mainly via other aggregator portals. And some of the collections that the aggregators have may not meet the publishing criteria for Europeana. So, for example, Archives Portal Europe has millions of records, but not so many of them have got a digital image. So not so many of them go on Europeana. And then beyond that, you have the collections from data providers, libraries, archives, museums, galleries. So let's give example, the British Library. Well, we have many, many more collections online which don't meet the criteria for Europeana, or they may not even have been digitized yet. So that's another big area that we don't know about. And then beyond that, there are data providers that have got an online collection, but they haven't got anywhere. They're not aggregating onto any type of portal. So we know that they're there, but they're not really shared anywhere. And then right beyond that, there are the non-aggregation collections, and we don't know about them at all. So we don't know if there's a small little museum somewhere that has got its online collection. Unless we know the address, we don't know where it is. We don't know what's out there. So I think something that I wanted to discuss, which perhaps we could be talking more about, is we need to look beyond our data providers. And we need to be able to look beyond the data providers currently aggregating to Europeana and its aggregators. It basically needs to scale up. And we need to be able to search across the basic structure of collections which are out there, most of which are organized in the same kind of way: the who, where, what, when, how. And a search interface for that needs to be looking across those different fields and making sense of them. So it has to be user-friendly, but it also has to be highly customizable to meet researchers' needs. Because often the criteria of one aggregator is to be able to deliver content to what it thinks its users are. And then there are going to be other aggregators where they'll say, well, we don't need to have that kind of criteria, because we want our users just to know that something is there, even though it may not be digitized just yet. But we need to let them know that it's there. So there is a kind of continuum of user needs that in the future, we're going to have to work out how to provide access and how to make sense of all that sheer amount of content that's already there. And I hope we have some questions to talk about this further. But thank you very much for listening. And I'm just going to give you a quick mention that there are still places available. We have a outreach event next Thursday on the 20th of June. The link's in there, but I will provide the link. And we'll be talking more about the reuse of collections for providers to Europeana. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you very much, Tom, for your presentation. So, dear attendees, you may type your questions in the chat section. You can type it either in English or in Turkish. You can ask anything that you are curious about. And at this point, I would like to ask you, you said that you would like to do Europeana more user-friendly for researchers. Right now, it's quite practical to do research on Europeana, but what other tools would you like, are you thinking to include in it?
Well, I'm thinking more, not necessarily Europeana, but we're talking about going beyond Europeana. So if there was the same kind of search interface on Europeana that helps you to filter content by country, type of media, region. There needs to be a way of doing that to all the content that's outside Europeana, so that it goes beyond that.
Yeah.
And that I think is going to be a challenge. There's a new phase for Europeana that the European Commission is funding, which is the data space for cultural heritage, and that's the kind of the next step to see how we're making a data space that is actually going to be reach beyond the data providers that are still already providing to Europeana.
Okay, so I think we'll hear more about it in the near future. On that note, I have another question, because right now having different platforms is quite it's quite in fashion, I have to say. And related to Europe Horizon, there was this European Collaborative Cloud for Cultural Heritage, for example, going on. Is this related with Europeana, or is it a different project? How do you collaborate with different projects like that in Europe?
Yeah, there are Europeana Cloud is well, it's kind of I think there's sort of there's ways of solving problems, and there may be different ways of solving problems. I mean, I think the data space it seems to be more about hosting problems, hosting actual content, because that's actually the real difficulty. And the cloud is more about a sort of sharing data. That's perhaps a rather simplistic, but so I think there are different ways of I think you can sort of be solving the problem in different ways, getting. And I think this is a sort of maybe this is at European Commission level, is just to be thinking about different ways of different teams, different projects, what works, what doesn't, how can they learn from each other. So there's that sort of collaboration needs to sort of carry on.
Okay, thank you very much. Checking the chat, but so far, when there's a question, I will read it. And another question would be about the Europeana Sound Collection. How do you see that it developed over time when you started, and now what are the major changes? And then
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the sound project started with about 20 providers, and I think what's changed is not really the sort of the number of providers, but the quality, how easy it is to get the sounds playing on the Europeana page. At the beginning, Europeana was very much much more of a sort of portal, because you might just see a small thumbnail, and then in order to see a full resolution image, you'd need to sort of go back to the parent the parent provider. And now almost all of the content, you can see the images, you can see in full resolution. With sounds, it's different, because the sound is so copyright restricted. It's almost as if there aren't really any entirely out of copyright sound recordings. There could always be some loophole, and it's sort of getting the technical developments so that the sound can be played from the Europeana portal, but still respecting copyright. And I think that gives a better user experience for people researching on Europeana. Yeah, there are sort of more recordings on the way from the British Library, because the British Library has been involved in a very big digitization project recently. So that will be the next phase, I think.
And that's a quite extensive phase then.
Yeah.
We have two questions. So the first one is do you only collect metadata if the material is online and is accessible online, or do you even collect content that you publish on Europeana's website?
Yeah, I think it. So I think most of it's the metadata, the descriptive data that goes on Europeana, and although the content needs to be accessible online, it's not on Europeana. So when you look at Europeana, you're actually, and you see all those images, you're actually looking at windows to digital objects on other servers, on thousands of different institutions across Europe. So you have the descriptive data, and then a link which just points back, because and that way Europeana doesn't have to deal with the content of 57 million objects. So that would be a big amount, far more to deal with.
And the other question is about what are the Europeana's rules for including data from an institution outside of Europe?
Yeah, well, as long as the content meets the criteria, as in, so it's publicly accessible without any passwords or subscriptions, and as long as the descriptive data meets the criteria for Europeana as well, then an institution outside the EU can provide content. It needs to sign the data exchange agreement with Europeana. So it's important to sort of make sure that the institution is able to. But there are many countries outside Europe that provide content to Europeana.
Yeah. Thank you very much, dear Tom.
Thank you.
And if there are any other questions, dear attendees, you may type anytime. So now we will pass to our second guest speaker, Jacob Hill. Jacob is based at Stanford University. He is data scientist at the Digital Library of the Middle East, also known as DLME. He is currently joining our talk at a very early hour in the morning from the US, so thank you again. And his talk is entitled in Improving Discovery and Access, Examples from the Digital Library of the Middle East. So, dear Jacob, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm happy to be here to talk about the Digital Library of the Middle East, and really happy to listen to Tom's talk before, and kind of maybe add a little comparison, kind of contrast in the way DLME does it. DLME is a much smaller project, budget-wise and scope-wise than Europeana, but it's also very specialized to Middle Eastern content. So we get a kind of a specialized approach to aggregation, and it allows us to do, you know, a few different things and take different strategies that may not work on the scale of Europeana. So just a brief history about the project. So DLME started in 2016 with a planning grant, and then shortly followed after that by a prototyping grant where we kind of built a prototype with some initial partners. We established a partnership with Qatar National Library, and then got a Mellon grant, which really allowed us to kind of take everything we had learned over the last 4 years or so and build a functional application that was intended for widespread use. We got another grant after that with QNL that enabled us to kind of explore further networking in the region to add more content from the region. And now we're in a phase where we've taken a step back for a year or so, and we're kind of assessing where the project's at, applying for new grants, kind of thinking about the directions we want to go in terms of aggregation work, in terms of feature development, and trying to kind of determine, I think, the best steps forward. So I think most people, when they think of DLME, would think about the web application, which is, of course, the part that surfaces to the public and the part that everyone sees. We have the web application. I'll show that in a minute. We also have other components, though, that I think are important to think about with DLME and to understand kind of how they all work together so that the web application is actually useful. So we have our data enrichment pipeline. You know, Europeana, or Tom shared about how Europeana has kind of data aggregation partners. We do 99% of the mapping internally with our own systems. Data partners are welcome to submit a pull request on GitHub, and actually change the way their data is mapped. And we have had a few data providers do that, but generally we do the data mapping, and we're having discussions with the data partners about the quality. We have a staging environment that we put the data in, and then we use that as a way to kind of surface our draft of the mapping and have discussions with the data partners and improve that over time. And then once that's kind of stabilized, it goes into our pipeline for automated refreshing on whatever period the data provider thinks is appropriate, or a standard period if they have no strong opinions about how often we refresh the data. We also do our best to kind of curate the content to make it more accessible. So we're thinking about metadata enrichment. We're also thinking about, curatorial groupings of content, which can be really useful for certain kinds of data, certain kinds of content that doesn't have rich metadata. I'm thinking particularly of museum content, or some rarer kind of content like data sets. But with museum content, for example, you don't have nearly as rich of a metadata. We often don't know who created the work. And so, many fields are missing. Date fields tend to be really widespread instead of kind of pinpointed years. And so you're kind of working with a limited set of metadata, and a lot of the images look very similar. And so it's kind of hard to kind of use the metadata to drill down into the content and explore what you're looking for. And so curatorial work becomes particularly useful in those contexts. And then we're constantly engaging with experts to learn about, what would make sense from a user perspective. How could DLME be more useful to find new collections and improve overall the usability and access to the content. So I'll show the web application. So if you haven't seen it before, go take a look. It's dlmenetwork.org. And so, this is our landing page. Some of the content that we've curated on the homepage. Yeah, you can browse around by facets or search over specific fields. And of course, it's all multilingual, so you can do everything in Arabic as well. Which is definitely useful for many of our users. So I'll talk a little bit next about the data enrichment and how that kind of plays into what you see on the website. We have, this is our data enrichment. Sorry, it's going to make me log in again. This is our data enrichment pipeline. But in this pipeline, we kind of have a bird's eye view of all of our data providers. And some of these are at the collection level, so it's a single collection. Some you might click on them and see multiple collections for one data provider, and really just depends on the limits of their server and us not wanting to overload their server, kind of how we organize it. But I'll show one from Turkey, Sakip Sabancı Museum, who's been a partner with DLME for some time. So we can kind of look at their collection. So this is showing 4 collections that we're aggregating, and in each collection kind of goes through this series of steps. This can change, we can add in custom steps per partner, but there's also a template that all of them go through. So if they don't need customization, this is essentially the template they would go through. It starts with, we harvest the collection, load the data. Often we need to filter some content out. This could be, because of copyright concerns, or because there's a limitation on their side in the metadata, and maybe they haven't organized the collection as a Middle Eastern collection, for example. Maybe it's just, here's all of our content, and we want to filter out the content that's not related to the Middle East. And so, we might do that at this step here. And then we transform the metadata, and this is the step where we do a lot of the data enrichment. So we're normalizing several of the fields, adding in some of our own metadata about data providers and things like that, collection names, countries. We add a lot of data at this stage that kind of just helps surface the collection a little bit better once it gets to DLME. From there, we do a kind of a transform validation. We're checking to make sure that the number of records that we harvested from the data provider is the same number that comes out of the transform pipeline, that we didn't lose any in the process, that we didn't have any errors in that process. We generate a mapping report after that gets sent to the data provider and gets sent to us as well. and gives us kind of a high level, coverage report, what metadata fields are there, what metadata fields are missing, suggestions for improvement, the quality of the thumbnails, and a number of other things are included in that report. And then, that report is sent off to whatever email addresses we've configured to receive the report. And then it's indexed into our staging environment, our development environment, so that we can see, and the data provider as well can look at that mapping. And then we archive the data. We don't automatically send this to our production environment at this point. We have a manual trigger that we've kind of held off at that, because we want to allow the data providers to have time to review their data. We want to look at it. Occasionally we hit, bugs, and we're still kind of working through some of those things. So we want to make sure that, if we hit a bug here, it's not changing our data in our production environment. So we're kind of holding that as a manual step, but then, whenever we're ready, we can just trigger with a button. If the data looks good in the development environment, then we just ingest it into production. So that's essentially how that works. And what that allows is it allows us to get really clean, faceted data. We can add our own types and subtypes, and so people can kind of drill down into content and see, they're interested in data sets, and what kind of data sets do we have. We just started adding data sets, by the way, so we only have one computational type of data, but we plan to add a lot more. Or they can drill down by language or date. And we have Hedry calendar as well. We convert Gregorian years to Hedry years as well for some users that might be easier for. And then, of course, collections and holding institutions, you can kind of get a large scale kind of view of what's there from our contributor site, the countries that it's coming from, and the types of data and so on, the collections that come from each country. For example, you can kind of drill down and see these are all the collections that come from the American University in Cairo. And it also lets us, that data enrichment step lets us translate all of the normalized fields as well as the data provider name and things like that into Arabic. In the ideal world, we're getting metadata from the data provider that's in Arabic and English, that's then indexed and fully searchable. But in some cases that doesn't happen. And in some cases, the metadata, it doesn't make sense for the data provider to translate their work into Arabic. For example, in Turkey, that's not always the case, right? The metadata might be in Turkish. And so in Sakap Savanchi's case, we're getting in Turkish and English. And so, we're indexing it into Solr, with specific language rules for the language that we get the metadata in. But if it is in Arabic, then of course, it will be, well, the normalized fields and, a core set of fields are all translated into Arabic. And so that will be surfaced no matter what. And then, of course, whatever the data provider provides in their own language will be surfaced in that language, whether that's Arabic or Turkish or, Persian or whatever. And then I think the other thing that I want to emphasize is, most of the users that we have are probably not going to start at an institution's particular web page, or even DLME, or potentially even Europeana. A lot of people are just starting with a Google search. So they're just kind of putting in the search engine and they just want to see what's out there and they don't even know where to go, right? And so I think the value of aggregation is that, these institutions like DLME and Europeana and others can really ensure that you're getting good search engine optimization, that your data is surfaced in Google and other search engines, so that when someone's searching for Turkish manuscripts, for example, your results are on the top. Instead of, in the case if you're a small institution, your manuscripts might be buried on the 10th page and no one might ever find them. And so we have found, that we're getting a lot of our traction is coming through Google. The majority of our traction is just people start on Google and then they find DLME that way, and then they're finding data providers through DLME. So, you know, I talked a little bit about the curatorial work, but I'll show some of these, you know, sets. So every collection that comes into DLME, we put at the top in this group we call recently added, so that our regular users can kind of keep track of new collections that are coming in and see that we just added, you know, this data set from the OpenITI Kitab project. But then we also try to work with data providers in different ways and our subject experts to try and identify more engaging and interesting curatorial objects from kind of across collections is one way to think about it. You know, like if you have, you know, the Cairo Geniza collection, I think is a good example of documents that was found in one place and then dispersed throughout the world, and someone who might want to research that collection, you know, would like to see it brought back together. And so, you know, it's like a great, you know, case for aggregation where, you know, we can't work out the politics of bringing the physical objects back together, or the economics of that, but we can digitally kind of create an experience in which all of those collections are gathered in a single place, and a user can browse through, you know, a complete collection. Or, you know, serials or photography, you know, so we kind of group these based on themes. This takes a little bit more work and it requires a little bit more engagement from our partners. But ideally, you know, for example, this Aberdindino archive, you know, we can, from Sakip Sabanci, we can surface this on our homepage, which ends up getting, you know, a lot more traction over the long run. And then lastly, I'll just talk about a little bit about our collaboration. So we try our best to kind of work with experts in a number of areas. Archaeology has been a big area where we've gotten a lot of interest in engaging with experts. We're working with experts in kind of more of a technical perspective from like OCR, you know, taking images of Arabic and Persian text and converting it into machine searchable, readable text, and you know the text reuse data, so we can kind of start to surface interesting connections between texts and other things like that. So we're constantly engaged with experts in terms of kind of exploring new ways to enrich our data, new ways to improve kind of the user experience on the website. You know, new ways to think about engaging with the content in DLME, identifying new collections. You know, we don't have the subject expertise to know, you know, all of the content that we represent in DLME, and so we really rely on our data providers to, you know, say that, okay, if you're doing this thing with Cairo Geniza, you know, there's this very important collection at this other institution that you really should include, and kind of let us know about that, and also make those connections with us to the data providers so that we can, you know, we can begin a conversation about federating their data. And I'll stop there. Thank you so much. I'm happy to take any questions.
Dear Jacob, thank you very much. That was very informative. And dear attendees, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat. Meanwhile, I took a few notes, and I have some questions, especially starting from the data providers. How do you find those providers? Like, how was that journey? Did you ask to institutions, or do institutions write to you to include their collections? How is this relation going?
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, happy to talk about it. So it's kind of gone through different phases. We definitely started with a lot of outreach. We had a lead curator. You know, this is after during the prototype phase, we reached out to a lot of US institutions that we had, you know, familiarity with and that we're used to working with and had content, and added a couple dozen collections from those institutions. That was kind of, I think, the easiest step for us. But then after that, once the project started with the Mellon Foundation grant, we had a lead curator, and we really wanted to target institutions in the Middle East. You know, we knew that was going to be a little bit more challenging for political reasons, for language reasons, for cultural reasons about how, you know, we share data and think about aggregation. And we really wanted to target that. We didn't want this to be a project where it's only Western institutions with Middle Eastern data. We wanted it to be a kind of a global project where anyone who has cultural, you know, Middle Eastern cultural heritage objects to share their metadata with us and make those accessible. And so we're really targeted for a period of 2 years, only institutions in the Middle East. You know, we wouldn't necessarily decline anyone else who sent us their data, but, you know, if without the outreach efforts on our part, a lot of people weren't sending us their data and kind of reaching out to us. So we really were targeting, you know, institutions in the region, in Lebanon and Egypt and Turkey and in other places in the Middle East. After that, we kind of expanded to a more of a global scope. Let's get in everything that we're kind of that's available. You know, as DLME has grown, you know, as we've gotten more users and more traction and more publicity, you know, in conferences and whatnot, we are seeing more people reach out to us and want to get their data in DLME. We're seeing that, you know, as people apply for grants, they're getting encouraged to think about their plan for sharing data afterwards. And we come up a lot in that case. Basically, any Middle Eastern content where someone wants, you know, a digitization grant or, you know, a grant to describe the metadata, you know, often that's leading to discussions about, you know, what's your plan? And then that leads to discussions with us about sharing their data afterwards. And we're currently working on a kind of prospectus for a project 25 for 25, where we're really trying to target the top largest kind of institutions with Middle Eastern, some of the most important Middle Eastern collections that haven't yet added their content to DLME. And so hopefully in the next year or so, we will really be seeing a lot more content come into DLME from these larger collections.
So there is a lot of things to do still.
Yes, absolutely.
So we have a couple of questions. There's one question about the GitHub corpus. Is the GitHub corpus now searchable from the DLME?
So the corpus, yeah. So I think when you talk about corpus, I'll specify. So the corpus is, of course, the typed or OCR'd content. You know, so there's these key, you know, Islamic texts that were scanned, OCR'd, and then often corrected by individuals who are reading these texts and hand correcting the OCR. And so I think that's the corpus. There are links in DLME to that corpus, to the individual documents in the corpus on GitHub. The OCR itself and the full text is not yet in DLME, but we're actually, you know, we submitted a collaborative grant proposal with that team, and hopefully that will lead to things in the future like sharing the full text and exploring like how we might use full text to further enrich the metadata in DLME, to enrich the curatorial kind of experience, and to make connections across content in DLME.
And another question is about transferring data. So which standard is it used when we transfer data, Dublin Core or Spectrum, etc.?
Yeah, so we don't have any, we're kind of standard agnostic. We have minimum metadata requirements that, you know, you have a few fields that we require basically, and we have recommended fields. We don't care what you call those fields in your standard, you know, we can map them to our standard. So we're really kind of agnostic from that perspective. And if you have, you know, we can really map most, you know, we can exchange data in most ways. If you have a CSV file that you want to email us, you know, we can figure out how to get it into DLME. Ideally, you would have, you know, an API, you know, OAI PMH API, or, you know, IIIF manifest for a collection online, and then we could, you know, or a CSV file, you know, posted online that you kind of manage the updating of, and then that would allow us to, refresh that data every month or every quarter or year, depending on like how often you think you might change that data and kind of keep the data fresh. But yeah, the data standard itself is pretty, we're very flexible on that end.
Mm-hmm. As a follow-up to that question, I would like to ask, what would you advise for institutions when they are working on their data? Like what would be things to consider and to pay attention?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of standards, I think it's always great to just pick one that's widely used, that works for your use case. We don't care which standard for our purposes. We can work with anything. But I think it is really important to think about the data quality. The more descriptive metadata you have, the more likely people are going to be able to find your content. If you're leaving a lot of fields out, you're not going to show up when people click on the facet, on Europeana or DLME. You're not going to be surfaced unless Europeana or DLME has the ability to add that data in later, which sometimes we might and sometimes we might not. So, but either way, you're much better off, providing that data. It's going to be indexed potentially from your own site in Google, but it also from aggregators down the road. And I would say with DLME, having that data in multiple languages is great. It doesn't have to be English and Arabic. I mean, obviously, English is a very popular language. It's great to have your metadata in English. I think it's also great to have it in the primary language of the users that you think might be using it, because that's what's going to get indexed in DLME and in Google. And help those users find it. So a multilingual approach is great. IIIF is a great option that I would highly recommend if you have that. It provides a much better user experience, overall for the users. And some of the features we have, that we're working on will really only be implemented for people who use IIIF. Like we're exploring the possibility of, what if DLME wasn't just an aggregator where we take other content and help people find it, but what if it was also, a metadata enrichment pipeline for institutions? So what if we enrich the data and then shared it back with institutions? So you kind of get this 2-for-1 by partnering with DLME. You get, greater access to your content, but then you also, help smaller institutions that may not have their own ability to, OCR their content. For example, it probably doesn't make sense that every institution in the world is trying to figure out how to solve the OCR problem so they can get full text search, right? We know all of our users want full text search, but like we don't all have the technical departments to do that. So, what if DLME solved that problem, for them and gave it back to them and also loaded it in DLME to provide full text search? Those kinds of questions. Yeah, so that's kind of what I would recommend, I guess. And we have a full list of our different data tiers on our about page on our website, so you can kind of see what we recommend at different levels.
Yeah, that will be very valuable. And dear Tom, the same question goes for you as well. So if you have anything that you would like to share on this.
Yeah, well, I really wanted to find out how the sort of search function works in different languages. I mean, is there I think in Europeana, there's a certain amount of skeletal information that gets translated automatically, but description-wise not. Is this something like that? And then also, if you were, say, searching on Google for a particular subject, but in the wrong language, is something going to come up on for one of those institutions?
Yeah. So I say it's simple. It's similar. Yeah. So there's a certain skeletal level of metadata, which for us that ends up being, the data provider, the country, the steward, which could be different from the data provider. Sometimes it's the same, but sometimes, one institution has the physical objects and another institution provides the metadata. So we want to represent both of those in the countries that they come from. And then I think the next step is we normalize whatever data we can. And that ends up being dates, language, and type fields. And those all get fully translated into Arabic. And then, we have different Solr rules for different languages that we support, which are all of the key languages in the Middle East, Turkish and Persian and Hebrew. And so, as we map the metadata, we're tagging language fields onto it. It's great. Sometimes the data provider will give us the metadata where they have already done the tagging and they'll say this title is in English and this title is in Arabic, but that's actually not the norm at all. It's typically, here's some text and it goes in the title field and we don't know what language it's in unless we look at. And so, we have our own way of determining the script. And then, we can, based on other knowledge, if we know this is a collection of Arabic manuscripts, or, we can apply at a collection level that if you see this script, then it's Arabic in Arabic script, or it's Persian in Arabic script, et cetera. And so we can kind of apply those language tags, which then get fed into Solr and tell Solr how to index it on our site. And then, of course, that's all passed on to Google for Google to, interpret the language and the search results in the specific languages. So that's kind of like a high level how it works. And of course, there are many gaps. If they're searching in a language that's not at all represented in DLME, then of course it's not going to show up probably, unless Google is doing some magic on their end that we don't know about, where they're translating, things across language, which, I don't know. But we were able to translate, some of those key fields and surface them that way. And so the ones that we're able to translate, of course, would be surfaced in DLME and in Google.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have another question about OCR. The person is asking, is that what about OCR in Ottoman Turkish text? So there's OCR in Arabic and Persian, and if DLME is OCR in Ottoman Turkish text.
Sure, yeah. So we don't OCR anything at the moment. That's one of the things that we're kind of exploring. That's one of the, we know that would probably, out of all the features that we could add, that would be the one that the users are most interested in. When we talk about our expert collaboration and we talk about, what do users want and what would make their research more useful. That's what they all want. They want to search across their collections and find exact words and exact phrases inside at least the ones that are working with text. The exact phrase, the exact words, kind of drill down to that text and find what they're looking for. And so that's what we're exploring. But I think from a technical standpoint, it's not any different or more complex, I should say, than Arabic and Arabic in script, or Persian and Arabic script. And the OpenITI team has really done a great job with kind of improving and really leading the world in some respects in this kind of OCR for manuscripts. I think this is not necessarily the focus of the big tech companies like Google and whatnot. And so they've been able to take some of those AI models and then tune them a little bit to work better with handwritten texts, handwritten manuscripts in Arabic and Persian. And I think it would work just as well in Turkish. There is a couple people at Stanford that we have intentions of collaborating with when we find the time, that are specializing in handwritten Turkish. They call it HTR instead of OCR, handwritten text recognition. And so I think that would, we could pull them in at the stage where we get to, doing HTR for Ottoman Turkish. But I think it should be, if we can do it in Arabic, we'll be able to do it in the other key languages as well.
Yeah. So there are two more questions that are actually on the same topic. So I will read one of them. Is about accessibility. Is everything on the DLME online accessible? I noticed, for example, on your screen, the Abidin Dino archive contains more than 1,000 items. But in my browser, I see only 6 items. Actually, 3 items twice each as written.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good, I'll go back to this. So as you can see this, so this is our collections that we're getting. So at one point when we loaded these in, they were all green. But sometime, recently this Aberdeen collection failed harvest. So something's happened on their end where we're no longer either it's not online or something's changed on their end, and so that collection is not showing up fully. And so we have to kind of go back and dig into that and figure out what that is. And haven't had a chance to do that yet, but that would involve first like digging into the technical logs and seeing what happened, and then probably talking with the data provider if it's something on their end and seeing why did this go down? Was it intentional? Did the URL change? Do we just need to update our config so we're harvesting from a different URL? But yeah, that's a challenge, I think, with aggregation projects, right? If you're not hosting the content yourself and you're only hosting the metadata, then the metadata is just pointing to something else on the web, and you have no control over the other data provider, whether they keep that stuff on the web or whether they change their IDs or they change their URLs. And so you're going to see cases where links are breaking. You click on the data aggregator site to the data provider and it doesn't work anymore. And so this idea of refreshing the data periodically is our way of trying to kind of mitigate the challenges from that. And I think this is particularly important in the Middle East because we've seen a lot of there's a lot of political and economic challenges that make keeping things on the web harder. And so we see things go up and come down later, and so yeah, so it is important to kind of review periodically, and this is just kind of what happened in this case. It went down and we haven't got around to like contacting them to figure out exactly how to get it back up yet.
Yeah, so it's an ongoing work. So it's not enough to just send the data and leave it there, but it's always a matter of following up.
Absolutely, yeah. Keeping the data refreshed, and I think from a data provider perspective, it should be ongoing as well. That you can think about, you can always improve your metadata, and make it better and more discoverable.
And we have our last question is actually uploading the data. How do we upload the media files? Are we uploading ourselves to the system or opening a port from the servers?
Yeah, so
And the media file.
sure. I think just an email would be a good start. Just send me an email, jacobhill@stanford.edu. And I think if you have IIIF collection level manifest, then all we need is a URL for that. We can put it in our configuration file and start the process. If you have an OAI PMH server or a CSV file that's on the web, all we need is a URL for those, and we can do the same thing. If you don't have any of those, then we would have a discussion about how you can share the data. You can share it manually, and we can figure out how to get in there if you just want to send it by email or other ways. We're happy to kind of work with you individually and see what works for your situation.
So, dear Jacob, thank you very much. And I would like to announce the link that dear Tom has sent. So on the chat, you will see the information about European Aggregators Forum outreach event on June 20th. So dear attendees, please take a note of that as well. So dear Tom and Jacob, thank you very much for attending this event. It was very informative and very interesting to hear from both of you. And I believe our attendees will reach out to both to have further discussions. So dear attendees, thank you. If you would like to watch this talk again, we will soon upload it on YouTube as well. So you may look back. And thank you all for being here. Happy International Archives Week. It was last week, but it's okay. We can count it as a month as well. So thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you.